Thank you, Gwen. God, clouds and everything. Wow. Are we rolling? All right. So we're being recorded, just so everybody knows. So you'll, at some point, these will be posted online, and you can review. We will also send out key takeaways. So if you miss something in taking notes, or you don't feel like taking notes, you'll at least be able to get the information later on. Okay. Welcome. Show of hands. We know there's a couple of people. This is their first session. I'm going to, show of hands. How many people in here are not yet managing people? Okay, about half. Okay, good. So you'll have some skills when you do finally become managers. So this is our third session. The first session was building rapport with employees. So we've kind of taken this series through a logical progression. So you have building rapport. The second session was coaching. Today's session is about performance management and the process of progressive discipline. Okay, so that's the process of, when someone is struggling with job performance or exhibiting certain behaviors that are not acceptable in the workplace, how do you take someone through the process of getting them to improve? And if ultimately they don't end up improving, how do you go through that termination process? The session next week is on delegating, which actually seemed to be one of our most popular of the 5 sessions. And then the final session we'll do in 2 weeks from today will be on behavioral interviewing. Okay, so if you're wondering, should you come to those next sessions, that's what we have. This is a little bit lighter than our last session. Those of you who might have gotten caught with the elevators not working, we're sorry, we didn't know they weren't working. We don't know if we lost some people. The elevators were actually down for like 30 minutes and nobody told us. So we apologize for that. Hopefully, I don't know. The few of you that came up on the elevator, did you see anybody leave because they got tired of waiting? No? Okay. All right. Yeah. Yeah. Well, the elevators are working now. So some of the people waiting were not coming here. But yeah, we had no idea. Oh, well. Okay. So we're going to get started. We've got a lot to get through, so we'll have about an hour of kind of presentation style, and then we'll go into breakouts again. Okay, so some ground rules right up front. Ask questions. I'm going to be asking you to respond to questions. The more people interact and talk, the better off we all are for our learning, right? And it's less boring than just hearing me drone on, right? So ask questions. Share. You have had experiences, either as a manager or maybe you've been on the other side and your manager did some things that were like, gee, I don't know if that was the best way to handle it. Let's talk about those experiences. But as we talk about experiences, we have to remember that what we talk about in this room stays in this room. It's a small world. Anybody in here, I don't know if the two are here this time, employee-manager relationship? In other words, the employees in here and their managers in here too? Not today. We did last week or the week before. Okay, so we don't have to worry about that. That's always a little bit tricky. And then challenge and contribute. If I say something you don't necessarily agree with or you have a different viewpoint, let's talk about it. Okay? I do not have all the answers. Even after managing people for 30 years, I still get exposed to new things and have, a different view on situations that I might have had, last week or, 10 years ago. Things change and situations are different. So challenge and contribute that way. No phones, no laptops, please. Let's just put those things away for the next hour or so, and then let's have some fun. Okay? All right. So with today's session, I want to make sure that by the end of today, you understand why performance management is important. Understand the best way or an effective way to give performance feedback. There is a wrong way, but there are many ways that are right. Okay? So we're going to talk about some of those things. And then I want you to be able to understand how to prepare for that more formal performance discussion. Has everybody in here actually been through a written formal performance review with as an employee or as a manager giving a review? So everybody had one? Okay. Some companies don't do it. Okay, and it actually is a growing trend that companies are getting rid of giving formal, written, annual performance reviews. And we're not going to go into all the reasons why, but a lot of companies do think today that it's a painful process, and if you keep up with regular discussions with employees, that formalized annual performance review isn't necessarily valid. Lots of different views on that, but companies are trending that way. We're going to talk about how do you tell someone they're getting a raise. What's the right way to tell somebody that? There's a better way, and there's a way that's not so good, right? So how do you tell somebody about a promotion? The more difficult conversation. Somebody comes to you and asks you for a raise or tells you it's about time for that promotion, and actually it's not time and they're not ready. So how do you handle that conversation? That's a very tough conversation to have. So we're going to talk a little bit about that and have you get a little more prepared for that possibility in the future. And then we want you to have a little bit more confidence in handling those difficult conversations. Okay? All right. So why does an organization manage the performance of their employees? Thoughts on that? What would be a reason why you want to talk to your employees about performance? Come on, somebody.
People are more accountable.
Make people accountable, right? Say it again.
Help people improve.
Help people improve. Good.
Keep goals front and center.
Goals front and center, right? Everybody's got goals. If everybody has goals that roll up to the organization's goals, the company should more easily achieve the goals of the organization, right? So that's a good one. Anything else? Yep. Ensure that people stay on course, right? So if individuals stay on course, the organization stays on course. What about making sure everybody's being treated equitably and fairly in terms of compensation, the roles that they take on, right? To make sure that things are fair. And then help identify those marginal performers and help them succeed, right? Why is it important to give your people individual feedback? And I'm not talking about performance reviews, but giving feedback on a regular basis. What are some of the reasons why we do that? Right? Good. They may not know what they can improve, right? What else? I'll do a reveal. Okay? First and foremost, there are some employees, especially more junior people, they're not quite sure what's expected. So you have those conversations so there's clarity about their expectations for them, right? And make sure that the employee understands, how well they're doing on a regular basis. And this is important because it's not something that happens once a year. These are things you have to have regular conversations with. In our last session, we talked about setting up regular meetings, right, with your employees, standing meetings, weekly, every other week. That's a perfect time to give feedback to an employee on how things are going. And we'll talk a bit more about that later today. It allows the employee to give you feedback, right? And kind of interesting, what about asking the employee for feedback on how you're doing, right? We're going to talk a little bit about that. That's something that a lot of managers don't do, right? That builds a tremendous amount of respect and rapport with your employee if you're willing to, put down the barriers and say, well, how am I doing? What can I do better? Right? It helps employees understand specifics where they need to improve, right? What you said. And then from an organizational standpoint, having those performance discussions and having those performance reviews helps organizations make the right decisions on how to reward people. You want to reward the right people for the right reasons, or you end up with dissatisfied employees. So having performance feedback is very important for that reason. A lot of people think, okay, performance management is about, getting people to improve, but also, what about the stars, right? So what about assessing someone who, when you deal with them, you're thinking, gosh, they could be a CEO someday. So giving performance feedback to people who are really, really good is just as important as giving performance feedback to people who may be struggling or may be just, kind of the average Joe, right? So performance feedback is just as important for those people who are those high potentials. And that's where you get into succession planning. Everybody familiar with what the term succession planning means? See, shake of heads. Okay. Anybody want to explain it, or want me to explain it, or are we good? Quiet group today. All right. How about assessing training needs, right? If you're having those conversations with employees and you're talking about areas where they might need some improvement or might want to learn something more, you can uncover some of those things that they'd want to learn, okay? Or that you find they need to learn to do a better job, okay? And then this is what we often forget. I mean, performance discussions really do improve employee satisfaction, engagement, and morale, right? So that if you're not having regular conversations with an employee about how well they're doing or things they could learn, things they want to learn, right? What do they want? I can guarantee you they're not as engaged as someone that is having those regular conversations with his or her manager, okay? Really, really important for engagement. Okay? Any questions on these? Comments? Okay. So, why do we as managers avoid having these conversations? I'll give you one. They haven't received any training on how to give a performance evaluation or have a discussion about feedback on performance. Right? So if you're not trained in how to do it, you may have a lack of confidence, right? Any other reasons you can think of? It's not required. That's right. So you get too busy, right? You got other things to do and nobody's forcing you to do it. You don't do it, right? Uncomfortable, right? Sometimes that's really an uncomfortable thing to do. Anything else? All right. So why don't we give feedback? right? They think positive feedback. Sometimes they think, well, we talked about that, right? It's just as important to talk to your stars about how well they're doing and the things they want to learn next than it is for those who are not your stars, right? So we often think it's not necessarily. They're doing fine. I don't need to have that conversation. They're really strong. I just let them, I give them things to do. They know what they're supposed to do, and I just let them go. I never have to worry about that person. You should not have that view, okay? You want to retain that person. You want to see that person achieve great things in their career with the company. Spend time with that person, okay? Some managers just have difficulty expressing their feelings, right? It can be that simple. It's an interesting one. Sometimes managers feel that, you give them praise, you might come across as insincere, right? So, if you're going to praise someone, you want to make sure that it's from the heart and you're serious about it, okay? Simple things like saying thank you, should come easy and should be sincere. Sometimes just practicing that will help you get more comfortable at that simple little task that is sometimes not so simple. Here's the big one, right? We just don't have time. The day goes by so fast, you're worried about, Joe over there who's struggling. You're not thinking about the people who are really strong. So positive feedback, very important to make time for, right? There's a fear that you give too much praise for somebody, the next thing they're going to do is ask for a promotion or a raise, right? So you're like, I'm not going to go there because I know that personality, they're going to be asking for more money. Not a great reason to not give praise. The one I started with, we're not trained to do it. Okay? Reasons for not providing constructive feedback, right? How do you give that feedback when someone needs to improve, right? The big one, they're just uncomfortable doing it, right? Part of that is not having the experience or the training to do it. Time, again, is an issue. Sometimes we don't know what the problem is, right? We see a person struggling, but we're not sure what the problem is, so we're like, we move on. We do other things. We're not focused on trying to figure out what that problem is. How do we help them to improve? So sometimes, we're going to talk about this in a few minutes, it's like, okay, sometimes you need to sit down with the employee and figure it out. And it takes time, right? If you don't know what the problem is, collaborate with the employee and figure out what the problem is, okay? And work together to improve. They fear, if I have that conversation, they're not going to like me. That's a very real fear. People tend to want to be liked by their team, right? So if they're given constructive feedback, that's going to can be perceived as a negative conversation, and they're not going to be liked as much. And actually, if you do it right, the reverse is actually true. They're going to have more respect for you if you are straightforward and direct and have those kinds of conversations in the right way. There'll be a whole lot more respect for you as a manager, and they will like you. They're not going to hold it against you. Okay? You're stressed. You're always short on resources. So if you're too hard on somebody, you're giving constructive feedback, you don't want to lose that person. You're like, I'm not doing anything. I'm not ruffling feathers. I don't need that person to walk out on me today. So we let it slide, right? That's very common. Okay, and as we've talked about, we don't have the training. So today you guys will have some training in this. So managing performance, I've told you already, it's an ongoing process. It's something you should do, at a minimum every month to have a conversation with somebody about how are they doing. So you should have those conversations on a regular basis. Don't wait for the annual review, right? So you're gonna give them feedback. You're gonna talk about the education, the growth needs. What do I want to learn? That becomes the personal development piece. How do I get to that next level? It's just an ongoing process that you do throughout the year, right? We set goals for them. We have a minimum of a mid-year update. Some companies do it quarterly. Some companies do it every 6 months. Some companies just have a year-end review, right? So some of what I'll talk about today as we get into the nuts and bolts of this, your processes, I've tried to take out specific things that relate to a specific process, because if there's 15 companies in there could be 15 different processes, right? So what we talk about today, you still have to take into consideration what has your company direction been communicated to you, right? So you have to keep that in mind, all right? But it is a year-round process. Okay. Who's responsible for the performance of your employees? You are? They are? Anybody else? Okay, so 2 for you as the manager, 1 for the employee. Company. It's the third one. Okay. Nobody's responsible for my performance other than me. I have to own it, beginning to end. If I'm not getting what I need to ask for it. If I'm struggling with something, I need to get help to get the answer, working with others, going to my manager, going to outside resources. But each of us in this room is responsible for our own performance, and our employees are responsible for their own performance. And when you have conversations with your employees, giving feedback, talking about performance, it's important that they understand that that is how it works. Okay? If an employee fails, and this is one of the things managers get really sensitive about, is if an employee is struggling and failing, they take it personal. They're like, I can't let this person fail. That's great, and that's admirable, and it's wonderful that you have that view and you feel, that it's that important to you. That's a wonderful trait, but in the end, it's not your responsibility that that person succeeds or fails. It ends up being the employee's responsibility. Now, we do have a responsibility to do these things, right? So we've got to give the feedback, right, so that they don't fail. So they're getting regular feedback, both positive and negative. We want to make sure that it's like when the event happens that they've done something wrong, don't wait weeks, don't wait months, don't wait for the performance review that you write it in there, and when you did that 8 months ago, yeah, that was probably not the right way to approach that problem. Don't wait 8 months. Have that conversation that day, that week, if possible. Every week that goes by, it loses impact. And they've missed an opportunity to learn as a result of maybe your own confidence in having that conversation. It's really, really important to have that conversation quickly. You're expected to articulate the goals and objectives, right? What do you want them to achieve, right? Get specific. Make sure that their objectives are aligned with your team. Your team's goals are aligned with your manager's goals, and your manager's goals with his manager's or her manager's goals. And it rolls up so that the goals of the people of the organization roll up so that the company achieves the objectives that they've set out for everyone, okay? if you make changes to things that you've agreed to, it's your responsibility to make sure they understand the changes. If their job responsibilities change, you have to make sure they clearly understand that. You can't tell them at the review, oh, you know, you were supposed to be doing these things. And they say, well, I didn't know. We never talked about that. So, you know, again, making sure that when you have regular conversations, if there are shifts and changes and responsibilities that you want them to take on or you expect them to jump into, tell them. Okay? Really, really important, be accessible, right? Make sure you're available to your employees whenever they need to talk to you. It doesn't mean you drop everything every time someone needs your ear, but make the time for them, right? And it's okay to give your employees boundaries. Look, on Tuesdays, I'm not available. Tuesdays, I have these 5 things that I have to do every Tuesday. Tuesday is not that day, okay? So it's okay to give them boundaries on when you're accessible. It's okay to give, you know, kind of like professors, they have office hours. That's okay, within reason. I mean, there are sometimes you have to go outside that, but you know, you can set aside specific times of the day or the week where that's your time, folks. If you need me, these are my time parameters. I'm available and accessible to you during those times. That's okay. That provides some boundaries and control, which keeps your day in control, but you're accessible, right? Emergencies, got to make yourself available, right? You support your employees when there's obstacles, when there's things they've hit a wall and they just can't get around. As a manager, we're responsible for helping them get through the issues, right? So, makes sense. We are responsible for our own performance. Whether we succeed or fail falls on us, and whether our employees succeed or fail falls on them. But we help. Okay? That's the way the working world is. Okay? All right. So now we're going to get into some performance management strategies. Those of you who were here in the last session, I'm just going to give a quick little recap. We talked about a coaching methodology, and there are several. We talked about this one, and we related it more to managing a team, solving problems. So this methodology was a 7-step: define the opportunity, brainstorm with the group to get to solutions, develop an action plan, set deadlines. How are we going to evaluate how well we're doing? Are we hitting the metrics? Are we moving things forward? Confirm that everybody understands all their roles, what they're supposed to do, and then to get out and do it, and then plan to have regular follow-ups so we make sure we're hitting the milestones, right? So that was a coaching methodology we talked a lot about in the last session. Today, we're going to talk about a 7-step performance coaching methodology. And I don't have the word performance up here, but these are the 7 steps. So think of it in terms of, okay, I'm sitting down with one employee. I'm going to coach them through a performance issue, right? Let's say, okay, so we're going to gather data. You got an employee. They've done really well for the last year and a half. They've just been promoted, and now they're struggling. So you want to think about, okay, what could be the problem here, right? So you're going to gather the data, right? So we know the person's new to a level, but they've been a good employee in the past. So there's something that they're struggling with. So there's new things they're doing, new expectations, maybe more complex problems that they're dealing with, higher expectations day to day. So you're going to sit them down with that data and you say, okay, so this is some data. we have a problem. You're struggling. I want to get to the bottom of this. I need to understand what the problems might be. The very next step, once you lay it out for them the way you see it, now you're going to say, okay, I need your view. Okay? Because what happens a lot of times is managers dictate to the employee when they're struggling with performance, it's the manager telling the employee what the issues are and what they need to do to fix it. A coaching methodology, one that involves the individual to help, remember, they are responsible for their performance, so you're going to talk to the employee about, tell me what you think the issues are. Because you know what? As a manager, you might be completely wrong. You might be missing something. You might be missing the fact that maybe that individual's going through a relationship problem at home. So you have just misdiagnosed the problem completely, right? So you want the employee to come clean, right? Discuss what they think the issues might be or what they know the issues to be. Okay? It's really important. So you have to listen at that point, right? Just ask probing questions, listen to how they respond, and once you then have a clearer picture based upon what the employee tells you, maybe you were right. Maybe you had it all right when you stated the issue. But if you didn't, now you're going to collaborate, again, because a lot of coaching is involving the person in arriving at a solution. Performance coaching is absolutely critical. So instead of telling the employee at this point, this is what you need to do, it's like have a collaborative conversation about how we might turn things around, right? What are some of the things that can be done? How can you help? What are the expectations that you have for them to turn it around? And you work together at coming up with some solutions. You commit to the plan together, right? So you say, yep, all right, we agree. We agree to solve this by doing these 6 things, right? I'm responsible for these 2. You're responsible for these 4, right? At that point, you tell the person, look, I know you can do this. You know, you've been successful in your prior role. So I know you're capable. We just need to get you on track. So, but if you can't, right, because you got to talk about what if they don't pull it together, what are the consequences, right? That depends on the company policies sometimes, but sometimes maybe I've moved people back to the prior role. Look, we thought you were ready for this, but you're not. We're going to put you back here. Other companies have a policy where you don't do that. If the person can't succeed doing this, then they actually may lose their job, right? So you have to talk about those consequences depending on how severe this is, right? And then, very importantly, you set a series of follow-ups, right? And the follow-ups are, you know, this is where we trip up a lot as managers. We have those conversations and we don't have follow-up. My view is every week you should have a check-in meeting to talk about this specific issue. So this is different than the regular, you know, let's spend our 30 minutes and we talk about things. You may need to add a second 30-minute time period during the week, talk specifically about the issue you're trying to solve with this person, okay? The follow-up is where we always, as managers, we typically fall down. We don't hold those follow-up meetings. And what happens sometimes is the employee gets 3-4 weeks down the road and you're saying, they're just not getting it. It's not improving. You should have had that conversation the following week and the week following that, so that it's not like 4 weeks later and now you're telling me I thought I was doing well. I thought I was hitting all the marks. And you're saying, no, you're not. So it's really important. They will have much more respect for you, and they have better chances of succeeding if you're having those conversations timely. Okay? Constructive feedback, giving feedback timely is absolutely critical. Yes?
What if you're the employee and your manager doesn't follow?
Excellent. Excellent question. Schedule it. I would like a follow-up. I want to know how I'm doing. So give the manager a heads up. He or she say, hey, I would like to sit down and get feedback. I'm going to schedule this with you. And I want to schedule it, not just the one, just schedule them out for the next 4 weeks or 5 weeks, right? Get agreement to the, what schedule of follow-ups with them so that they know what you're doing instead of a meeting just popping on the calendar, right? Getting agreement up front. Excellent question. So sometimes the employee, and by the way, you can tell the employee, if you're the manager, you can say, schedule the follow-ups with me, get them on my calendar. Okay? Again, involving the employee, I own my performance, take ownership for the follow-up. That's perfectly acceptable. Okay? Yeah? We're going to talk about that. I'll tell you, that is one of the worst things that you can do for an employee who, even if it's just the regular 30-minute discussions you're having every 1 to 2 weeks, as just to make sure we're on track on things. If you keep canceling it, how do you feel when your manager cancels that time and time again? Exactly. You're conveying a message you don't really want to convey, and you may not intend to convey, but you're saying you're not important. It's not important enough for me to keep that. I have more important things to do today, so I'm canceling that meeting again. It's a horrible message. So as managers, don't do it. By the way, if you're the employee, don't cancel it either. Right? Yes?
But in that situation, if they cancel 2, 3 times, if you really want to have that meeting, like what should you do?
Okay. Direct conversation. When you cancel those, I really want these meetings. When you cancel that meeting on me, I feel like I'm not important. I mean, you're telling me it's not important to you. That's how you make me feel. So if an employee came to you and said that, what would your reaction be? You'd feel bad. And you probably wouldn't cancel it next time either, would you? Do that. That's perfectly acceptable. Look, there are some people in business who are just, you can always count on them to be direct, right? We all know those people. And you just know that, that person in that meeting, in that conversation, they're gonna throw you a zinger. You're like, whoa. But they're being direct. And that's, in most cases, that's healthy. I mean, if the tone is destructive, that's not healthy. But being direct is okay. I mean, everyone's more effective when we're direct with one another. It doesn't mean to be mean, doesn't mean to exhibit destructive behavior for your relationships and the business. Being direct is okay. Direct but respectful is okay. And telling somebody how their actions make you feel or the impact it's having on you is actually really important, because that person's going to learn. When you do that, the person learns from you. They learn from that situation. And they may be doing it to many other people throughout the course of a year. And you might really help them to change in the way they manage. So if an employee says that to you, listen, okay? And try to change what you're doing if an employee gives you feedback, okay? That's why I mentioned before, ask an employee of yours, how are you doing? Meaning me personally, right? So how am I doing as your manager? What are the things I do well? And what are the things you want me to do differently or better? If you want to grow as a manager, that's a perfectly reasonable approach to take with people who work for you. Some people will be more comfortable in giving you an answer than others. But if you're doing enough with people, everybody will be comfortable telling you for the most part. Okay? It takes guts. It takes guts to ask that question. And by the way, be ready for what the answer might be. It could be kind of revealing. It could be startling. But it's how you learn, right? That's how humans learn. Okay? Good one. All right. So I've been through the next two slides by going through this. So I'm going to skip through those. So if you go through the 7 steps to coaching someone through a performance issue, you got a good chance that they're going to succeed. Like 90+% of the time people succeed, right? So good employees mess up now and then, right? So if you follow the process, it's highly likely you're going to get them back on track. It takes a little bit of time and effort and preparation. Preparing for these conversations is absolutely critical. Don't walk into a follow-up meeting without doing your homework. We're going to talk about that in the upcoming slides. Doing your homework as managers is really, really important. There's nothing worse than going into a conversation about performance and you haven't prepared for it. Okay? And I have a little trick that I use in preparing for these things that I'm going to share with you. Real quick, some tips for delivering feedback. Okay? Try to mix feedback with some positive things and some constructive things, right? Trying to avoid using the word negative, right? So constructive is a better word for negative. Sometimes you can't always do that, but it does help to do that. One thing I just realized I don't have on this slide is when you start a conversation with an employee about performance, giving them constructive feedback, open it by saying, can I give you some feedback? Okay? What that does up here is you have now asked them to open up a door or a window. Open up. I have asked your permission to do this with you now. Okay? And when the person says yes, subconsciously, they will be now in a receptive or a receiving mode. Okay? So you start conversations like this with, I would like to give you some feedback now. Can I do that with you? Okay? Even if the meeting was set up to give feedback, it's like, are you ready to receive feedback? I'm going to talk to you now about some things. Okay? Start off those conversations with that question. Okay? Talked about this a little while ago. Ask your employee for feedback about you. Okay? Oh, there's the permission. There it is. Sorry. I just was thinking I didn't have it in here. So at fourth bullet, ask for permission to give feedback. Nobody told me it was up there. All right? So, when you give feedback to somebody, you got to be careful. Sometimes we say things that are, they could be construed or come across as we're attacking them, right? Instead of something that they're doing, And sometimes this happens when we're human. right? Sometimes, you know, we like some people, relate better to certain people than we do with others. And sometimes you might not relate well, or, you know, this person isn't the kind of person you'd like to spend a lunch with or a Friday night with. But you have some people that you genuinely like, and you'd love to spend a lunch or a Friday night with them. So you have to be careful when you're talking to that person that they're not really your cup of tea. You have to be careful that when you're giving feedback that you're not unintentionally attacking them, their personality or style. You're talking about, you know, specific behaviors or activities revolving around performance. Okay? Don't attack the person. Focus on a behavior. Right? It's really important that you don't always just focus on what it is they're doing. If you want somebody to really understand, because sometimes people are a little thick, right? They're not hearing the message. So sometimes it's better to say, you know, what is the impact of what you're doing on the people around you? Okay? When you do that, this is how people perceive that. And it's hurting your image. It's hurting people's perceptions of you as a coworker. That has impact more than saying, you know, you got to stop coming in late. Right? If you talk about what it's doing to their reputation, that has a better impact than saying you can't come in late anymore. Okay? It's a really good tool. Allow the feedback to sit in. Sometimes silence is a really uncomfortable thing when you're talking about a performance issue, but sometimes you got to let things go quiet. Because what happens is the employee's sitting there saying, all right, they're looking for me to say something here. All right, what am I going to say? What do I do? It's been quiet now for 20 seconds, 30 seconds, 60 seconds. Wait, right? When they start to talk, that's a time when people actually tend to start opening up a little more, right? That discomfort of silence actually generates a reaction in some people that gets them to open up a little bit more, because they're searching for things to talk about to fill the silence gap. You can find out some really interesting things from people by using the silence, letting the feedback sink in, and then they start talking about, hey, something that they've learned from this, or sharing a viewpoint that if you just kept going, you never would have heard that. Okay? It's okay to sit back, let them take it in, and let them be the next one to talk. Okay? If the person doesn't seem to know what a more effective behavior is, you know, kind of like involving them in this thing, saying, can I give you some advice? Because sometimes, you know, kind of like, can I give you some feedback? You know? If you ask them, can I give you some advice? Because they don't seem to be getting it. Now they're going to be receptive, or more receptive, right? Ask for the permission to go this next step, give them some advice, and you'll have a chance at getting through. Okay? Any questions on these tips? Yeah. Very good question. What do you do? Anybody got ideas on that? So you're trying to get a message through, and the person just is like, it's not my fault. It's not my fault. You know? What do you do? Anybody? You know, that's pretty extreme. But I could guarantee you it's happened. There are probably some steps you might need to take before that. But it could be one step. Okay?
Maybe ask them to identify like
Mhm.
work with them to brainstorm how they can get around those issues.
Okay. So basically you're saying, okay, it's not your fault. You keep saying it's not your fault. So then, okay, well, whose fault is it? And let's talk about those things. It's one way. You know what? There's not only one right answer to that. I'd say that firing is the extreme. Okay? And by the way, it depends on all the things that have happened leading up to that point. So I do say sometimes, ultimately, that could be the answer. But there's a lot that has to happen before you do that.
Oh, I thought this was like a regular occurrence, not just like that.
Yeah, she did mention regular occurrence, but it needs to be fairly extreme to fire. Should be fairly extreme to fire. Oh no, don't be sorry, because I say it could be a solution. But I think responding to that with questions versus it is your fault and here's why. This is one way, right? You can, but they've historically pushed those off, right? So now it's okay. It's not your fault. Whose is it? And then you can respond with why it's not that. Next one. You know, respond to each answer, right? To say, here's why it's not that in my view, okay? Sometimes you're going to have a person that will never accept that responsibility, right? That happens. Hopefully those are rare. Are you dealing with one of those now? It's a fourth. Oh, not anymore. They're gone? Okay. So that ended in firing? He quit. Well, as I say, sometimes there's more than one way to skin a cat. That works. Congratulations. On the person.
So it's not like, how this is happening to help me, and you're like, why don't you come back to me and tell me how you're going to fix it, and have them come up with it, and then they take the ownership of whatever
Yep.
the issue is.
That's a good one.
Not depending on you to solve it for them.
Yep. Yep. Were you here the first class? Okay. So in the first class we talked about mismatching. You know, you can match people to build rapport, and you can use mismatch as a tool. That's an example of a mismatch. You cut off the meeting. You said, "We're done here. I want you to go and think about this and come back." That's a great way to do it. It makes them go back and like, "Oh my God, she ended it." Now to revive this conversation, I got to come up with solutions, right? Or to keep my job or to be in a better light, I have to come up with solutions. That's a great approach. Yep. Good one. Yes?
How many chances should you be giving someone, and how many feedback sessions should you be giving?
That's the age-old question, and we're going to talk about that. So we're not going to go there yet. And I will say right off the bat, it's different for different situations, different for different companies. So there's no set rule, okay? We're going to talk about a 5-step process. And it's kind of really a 3-step. The last 2 are kind of decisions made, but we're going to go into that. All right, so now everybody in here has a different performance review process. So what I'm going to talk about here are just some of the formalities that you should follow as a manager it's like the etiquette for us as managers in performance reviews, okay? So here are some guidelines, right? So you write the review, you've looked at your notes throughout the year, thought about all the things that have occurred for that employee, and now you're going to deliver the review. Okay? Not yet. Right? So you write it, you get ready, and you think it's ready to deliver. How many people in here have done that and then reviewed it with your manager before having the employee discussion? How many have not done that and gone ahead with a review discussion? Good. It happens a lot. So the employees, the managers do the reviews, and they just make the meeting with the employee, sit down and do the review without having a review with the next level of manager. Should never, ever do that. So even if your manager isn't asking you to do that, set up the meeting with them to sit down and go through the reviews or review for the people that you're going to have performance discussions with.
Kind of a silly question here is, what if you're the highest level of that?
You're the boss, you can do whatever you want. Yeah, I mean, if there's... do you have a dog? I don't know, you know, if there's no one else higher than you, then...
So what guidelines would you use to assess what would be like good?
You know what? What you need to do then is probably assess or calibrate with other team members. So take special care to make sure you're kind of ranking your people within your team to make sure that what you've written for this, if you were to think about chronology, or you know, your top performer, your second performer, your third, look at the reviews and make sure that the third level of performer, that review doesn't sound better than your top performer, right? So you're doing an individual calibration within your team. If there are other teams and you have, you know, peer managers, it's good to do the calibration across teams, you know, because other teams, they kind of have a sense sometimes of how your people are doing with certain things. So they might have a view on, that's your strongest person. That person is not your strongest person. You know, so, you know, sharing the reviews across the organization sometimes helps calibrate, which is why you share the review with the next level of manager, because they got to make sure there's calibrations being done across the teams, right? That's why we do it. So if you don't have anybody above you, you got to make certain, you know, crosswise that it makes sense. Okay? Does that help? Okay? Any questions on that? Okay. You set up a time to meet. Do you cancel that meeting? No, we don't cancel meetings when we're talking about performance, right? Manager shouldn't cancel it. We as employees shouldn't cancel. Okay? Look, emergencies happen, right? There's always that, you know, 2% chance that something that unavoidable comes up. It happens. But really don't cancel unless it's absolutely necessary, right? Never walk in on a Tuesday morning and say, Joe, let's go do your review. You got time now? It's like the worst thing that you can do to somebody, okay? For some people, performance reviews are, you know, yeah, I have my performance review today. It's not an emotional thing for them. You know, there's a confidence level or an ignorance level, maybe. It doesn't matter. But for most people, performance reviews generate a significant amount of anxiety. And springing something like that on somebody is just, it's not fair. So you schedule time up front. Don't just walk in and spring on somebody. Face-to-face whenever possible. I know we have some folks in here that, you know, have people that might be remote. You know, if you have to use a phone, you use a phone to have a conversation. They'll have the document, you know, with them, and we'll have the document as a manager in front of us. Video is even better. because there's nothing better than seeing the visual expressions of somebody in a performance review. So you're reading them. Reading that person is absolutely critical so that you can get a sense for how this is hitting them, right? So video if possible if you can't be in the same room. Never send the review. Anybody ever had a performance review just sent to them and the manager didn't have a conversation? They said, you know, read this, let me know if you have any comments? That's tough. That's tough. I mean, look, it happens all the time. It's just, it's not ideal. I mean, a performance discussion is a discussion. It's not just read the document and sign and send it over and we're done. You need to have a conversation, okay? Give the employee an opportunity to respond to things that are in the review, have a conversation. It's really, really important. So you don't just let them read it. In fact, I don't recommend sending the review like the night before, okay? Remember, people, this is an emotional thing for a lot of people. And you know, you don't know always what's on a person's mind when you talk about a specific situation in a performance review, what their view of it might have been. And they see something in the review that they completely disagree with. And what you might do is you might just give them a sleepless night, right? It's really not fair to do that to somebody. Don't give it to them the night before. I say, you know, give it to them a couple hours before. If you want to have them read it first, okay, and then use the discussion time. You like have a list of things that you want to just call out in the review. You know, sometimes it's difficult, right? So if you bring somebody in and you give them the review, they've never seen it, now they have to read it. And you're going to sit there for 10 minutes while somebody reads a document. Feels like a really long time, right? So to avoid that and speed the process, if you sent it to them 30 minutes to an hour ahead, and you told them ahead of time, look, I'm going to send you the review. Our meeting's at 10 o'clock. Make sure you're free at 9:30. I'm sending you the review. I want you to read it, and you come in, and we're going to sit down and talk about it, okay? So try to limit that, not more than 2 hours, and never overnight, okay? Don't hold it in a public place. Anybody ever had a performance review like sitting in a restaurant? How was that? Was it weird? Was it okay? See, if it's an easy review, it's like, no big deal, you know? It's just, yeah, we had a great lunch. You know, but sometimes, you don't know what kind of emotion you might generate by something that's in that review. It's a risky thing. Obviously, you know, a really good review and you have great rapport with the person, you kind of know what it's going to be. It's not such a big thing. But, you know, it's generally, you shouldn't do it in a public place. You book a conference room, an office, and you have that conversation, okay? It just allows for freedom of expression. Whatever that expression might be, they have the freedom to do so, okay? Make sure you have enough time. You know, you have employees, you kind of know, you can get it done in an hour and probably less, so you schedule the hour. If the discussion's over in 30 minutes, you just got 30 minutes back out of your day. There's nothing worse, though. You know, you have that one employee that you know, you have a conversation with him, it never takes 15 minutes. And if I'm going to spend time with that person, it's going to take me an hour. Schedule an hour and a half with that person, okay? The worst thing is to get, you've scheduled a meeting, backed up to this performance discussion, and you reach the end and you're not done. And you have to extricate yourself from that conversation and say, I got to end this, we got to reschedule and get back together. Just not ideal. So, you know, based upon whether you think the review is going to go longer, shorter. An hour is generally enough, but you may need a little bit more. Okay. Let's say you bring somebody in, right, and they haven't read the review yet. So now you got 10 minutes while they read the review. What do? What do? You got you might have your computer, you got your phone. It's kind of annoying, typing on a computer while they're reading, your blips on your phone as you're playing your game. Don't do it. Just take some time, read back through, think, you've prepared for this conversation, so you're already prepared, but just look over your notes one more time. Make sure you're focused on what are the 4 things you're going to call out in a review. A couple positive things, a couple of constructive feedback. Think about the conversation you're about to have. Just spend 10 minutes, not on a keyboard, not on your phone. Okay? I've already talked about giving it to them ahead of time. Make sure the discussion's balanced, right? So a lot of times managers, they give a performance review, and all they do is identify, the things you did wrong over the last year. Balance it out a little bit. Give some kudos, pats on the back, give some constructive feedback. The constructive feedback and the positive things, remember, if you've been doing your job well throughout the year, they've already heard it at least once, right? If it's something that slipped through the cracks and you never actually addressed it with them, it's going to be told to them for the first time, right? So, balance it out. Positives and negatives are constructive. If an employee takes issue with something that you don't understand what happened there, and by the way, we're human. We do make mistakes when we write performance reviews. And there are times when a performance review it's not accurate, and it does need to be changed. So if that's the case, and your company will have a policy on how to do. I don't recommend the change just be made in the room. Oh, let me go in, let me make the change, and then we'll sign it here. Because if you've done the right thing in the review, you've already reviewed that with your manager. So the manager should be made aware, look, there's a substantial change here I got to make, right? Yeah, if it's a minor wording change, doesn't change the outcome of the review, yeah, that's something you might want to just change right there. But if it's going to skew the review, make it better or not better, you should review it with the manager, and then you come back to the employee after your manager's reviewed it, and you have a conversation with them and say, okay, we've agreed to make this change. Let them see the change. If it's changed the overall review result, let them see that. Have any discussion about that, you sign the review. Okay? Yes? Okay. Just generally, say there was a particular incident that happened. Person made a mistake on a spreadsheet that got to a client, and it was wrong. Okay, but in your mind, it was that employee who did that, when in actuality, it was another employee. That's a perfect. Sometimes that'll happen. You're like, oh, you're right. I thought that was you. That doesn't belong in your review. That's an example. I mean, sometimes as humans, we make a mistake. We thought it was you, but it wasn't you, so we're going to make that change. Something like that. Does that help? Yeah, okay. Oh, we're really running on time, aren't we? Uh-oh. This is going to shut down too, isn't it? Okay. Yeah, when this system shuts off, class is over. It shuts down automatically at 7, and the receiver's got to reboot. Okay. Tips for documenting: don't rely on your memory, right? Keep notes. Keep a desk file. I keep an email file for employees. So when emails come in that I want to make sure I have for reviews, I just move it over into that folder, right? I keep a Word document that has, comments for an employee. So, employee's name, Christine. I got a Word document that, and I'll just, as things happen, I just open up that document, make the note, close the Word document, file it away. It's just always there. If you're a paper person, keep a folder in the desk, write it down in your notebook, right? So you keep those things handy, and it takes seconds to do it when the situation occurs. And then if you're doing a great job as a manager, you're having those discussions with the person on a regular basis. It's there and it's available. It's all ready for you when you do the annual review. Put the status and feedback sessions on the calendar, right? Schedule them. If we don't schedule things, it doesn't happen, right? We get too busy. We've talked about this. When something happens, don't wait. Give them feedback close to the time of the event as possible. Don't wait for review time. Don't wait weeks or months, okay? Concept of progressive discipline. All right. So this is a process for dealing with those job-related behaviors or performance that do not meet the requirements of the job, right? So this is a process by how we address those things, right? So it allows for the employee to understand, what have I done wrong? What's lacking in my performance? It's not to punish, it's to help them improve, right? So this isn't about, whipping the person because they've done wrong. It's let's not do this again, and here's what we're going to do so it doesn't happen again. And then if we fail to turn things around, it's really the mechanism to make sure that we are treating the person fairly and equitably, and that we're not putting the company at risk by doing something that's not really fair as compared to what we've done for other employees in similar situations, right? It's about managing risk and doing the right thing for people, okay? All right. So we're going to depart from a 5-step, even though the 7-step is part of the 5-step, which you'll see in a minute. We're now going to go into a 5-step process for dealing with that progressive discipline. The most important thing in this process is being prepared for every conversation you have with an individual. You've got to be prepared every time. And that's typically where managers trip up the most. We don't spend enough time up front before a conversation so that the conversation is clunky. We don't communicate well, the meetings don't go well, we get nervous. You're less nervous the more prepared you are, right? So prepare for every performance discussion when you get into where someone's really having a problem, okay? Or you're going to have problems, right? So you want to make sure that you're uncovering any skill deficiencies in the process. So if there's something that we haven't done as the employer to help them have the skills needed to do this job, if that's something we should have done, you need to uncover that in this process, okay? And then by the second step in this process, you're going to want to make sure that you're not alone, that you have a manager, like your manager, or HR in the process, okay? All right. So step number 1, okay? So now you have an employee who's just not meeting the requirements of the job, okay? As soon as you think there's a problem, the first thing you're going to do is you're going to sit down with the employee and go through the coaching. First step involves a 7-step performance methodology, okay? You gather the data, you explain what the issue is, you get the employee side, right? You collaborate on coming up with the solutions, and then you commit to that plan to address those things. You tell them, you can do it, I've got confidence in you, but you know what? If you don't make it, here's what the risks are, okay? You could lose your job, you could be reassigned, you know, whatever those consequences might be. And if you're not sure of what consequences yet, it's okay that you go light on that. But if there are consequences that you can kind of say, this could happen, tell them at that point, okay? And then set the follow-up, right? Get the meetings on the calendar for follow-up, okay? Step number 1. Any questions on step number 1? Step number 1 involves the 7-step methodology. Step 2 in the 5-step process for progressive discipline is, okay, this didn't work. You've tried to coach that person. You've been going through this for about 30 days with the person, and they're not turning it around. They're still struggling with whatever it is. It could be as simple as they just can't get to work on time. It could be that simple. Okay, so that's a behavior. It might be that they just keep making mistakes. They're not careful. And the mistakes you've talked about in this process, they are still making similar mistakes. They're not showing either the desire to fix it or the capability to fix it. There's a skill that's missing. Okay? So if that's the case, now you want to progress to the written warning. Okay? So you've had a conversation. Sometimes we'll take this a couple of tries, right? Depends on the situation, also depends on the company, right? But if you want to fast track this once at step 1, and you move right into a written warning, okay? The longer this goes on, sometimes we kind of know, you know, that person, they're just not right for this job. Why would you go through this twice? Why would you wait on the written warning part? Move it forward. The longer this person is struggling, you're not doing them any favors. Sometimes a person's in the wrong job. And we as managers, we see it. We're like, that person's not the right person for this job. The best favor I can do for them is get them to realize that for themselves and make a change in their lives. They need to be in a different job. So you just move it forward in the process. Have courage. Be direct. Have those conversations. Be prepared. Get through this process in step number 1. Get to step 2. Do the written warning. Make sure that they understand specifically what are the standards expected in that written warning. Give them the time frames within which you expect them to get these things done or see the corrective measures. Have the employee sign. If you send it in an email, they have to, you know, I've received this email, they have to respond, acknowledging receipt. If you put it in a written document, you want a signature, okay? It's really important because sometimes they say, I never got that email. You never shared that document with me. Or we talked about a change, you never changed it, so I didn't sign it. Okay? You need acknowledgement at this point. You share a copy of that with HR, put it in a file, right? At this point, HR needs to be aware that there is a problem and you're giving a written warning to somebody. You should, at step 2, your manager is on board and HR is on board. And I don't think that's different no matter what company. Some companies are small, they don't have HR. Okay? Your manager. You're the CEO, so so, you know, you make sure upper level management is on board, okay? That didn't work. Problem is now continuing. So now you're like, okay, I got to go to step number 3. This is a final written warning. Now, final written warning sometimes is performance related, but many companies go to the performance improvement plan, a PIP. Takes various formats, so I'm not going to get into formats, but it's a process. Sometimes it's just a letter. Behaviors, it's just a letter. If it's performance related, it's a PIP often. Now you got to get real specific, right? So now you're going to identify if it's a PIP. You know, these are the 3, 4, 5 areas where your performance isn't meeting the minimum level required for your job. Okay? You tell them these are the issues, but not just the issues. You have to describe to them what's expected, what's success look like. So you have to take a paragraph or some data that shows this is what success looks like. So this is no, this is what I'm looking for. Okay? And you just focus on the specific areas where they're struggling. Okay? You don't have to put, you know, every area from their job description because maybe they're not struggling everywhere. Okay? Focus only on the problem areas. This is not now about a pat on the back. It's about you're in trouble and you need to fix these things. And this is what we expect to see. Okay? You give them copies of the prior documents. I'm going to go back real quick. What I do to prepare for these things is I write, after each meeting, you know, you want to send them a follow-up. This is what we discussed today, right? And this is, so I do that before the conversation, and that's my script. So whenever, I still do this. If I go into these conversations to help a manager, I've scripted this out. And a lot of times, I'll script it for the manager, and I'll script it for myself. So that I've done that in email format, so that when the conversation's done, I might make some changes to that script, because we've discussed other things. So I make sure I've documented everything. That's my note to the employee that they're going to sign. Okay? So we make sure all the prior information is attached, so they get to see those things again, a little reminder that this is, we're not visiting this for the first time. Making sure we've got what success looks like, what's the performance criteria. And at a minimum, the final warning needs to really say something like the following. Failure to show marked and sustained improvement over the next, sometimes it's 30 days, sometimes it's 60 days. When you get to 90 days, that's way too long. 30 days is adequate in most cases. Sometimes you want to give a little bit of a benefit of the doubt, you go to 60 days. Will result in termination of your employment. If your performance should deteriorate further during this 30-day period, your employment may be terminated sooner. Okay? There is no question about consequences with that statement. And that is absolutely critical when you reach the point where they're getting this final warning that they understand that that's the case. That takes a lot of the risk away from the company in terms of wrongful termination suits. You didn't give me a chance. We didn't discuss these things. All of that. It needs to be in there. Okay? And if you go through this and your HR person isn't putting that language in there, ask for that language to go in there. It needs to be there. Okay? Anybody ever gone to this step with anybody? Okay. It's nerve-wracking when you get to this point.
It is, but I feel like
Yeah, that's, it's not only risky, there's an element to that that's not fair to the employee. Because, you know, there's a part of that, you got to say, have they understood everything we talked? When it's in writing, you kind of take the question on, did they understand what we were saying? They read it, they signed it, you know. It really, to be of limited risk to the organization and to be fair to the person, you have to do it in writing. Someone who gets dismissed without something in writing that's shaky ground. Bless you. Okay, so again, step 3. So now you've got them on a, let's just use 30-day plan, right? And it's been in writing, and you've had them sign off on it. Schedule the meeting. This is where 90% of these improvement plans fall apart, because you deliver the improvement plan, and you don't have another sit down with that employee. So now they're out on the floor, they're working, they're struggling, they're sweating, they're just, you know, maybe they're thinking, I'm doing fine, nobody said anything. Okay? And 30 days comes, and they're called into an office to get terminated. They're like, I thought I was doing okay. You gave me the written warning 30 days ago, but you never talked to me again after that. It's the most important aspect of the final warning is to have the follow-up conversations. Check-ins. How are you doing? If by week 2 or week 3, their performance is just as bad as it was, do you want to continue? You have the option now, because you've talked about it. You can end it. You can, you know, put the person out of their misery. They're struggling. If a person has reached this point, you can be darn sure they're not really happy coming into the office day in and day out. You know what I do? I've done many, many times in my career, is rather than put the person through this, when I give them the final warning, I say, you have another option here. We see you struggling. We don't believe you're in the right job. We do not see you succeeding. For this 30 days, take this time and go look for your next job. Take this time, get your resume put together, but be available to us. If we need you to come in next Tuesday, you come in next Tuesday, do what we need you to do. But unless we call for you, you should be focused on your next move. On the 30th day, you'll come in, we'll have a termination discussion, and that'll be it. Okay? I much prefer that approach. It's the most humane thing you can do for someone that you already know the outcome. Why do you want to put the person or the organization? Everybody has to work with this person. It's a very uncomfortable thing for the team, because oftentimes the team knows that this is going on for this person. They feel bad for them. You feel bad as a manager. You're taking up your time to have the follow-up meetings, and you know that it's the end, right? So I worked for an organization for quite a while where they know, Eric, we do not want to do this 30-day thing, go look for a job. It's not the way we do it. I never could get them to understand that was a kinder approach to take. They just, nope, we don't do that. We don't do that. It's not part of our process. So I lost that battle. But
Does anyone ever bounce back? Do employees ever bounce back from that point? Or is it
when, I have to think about that. When we've gotten to a final written warning, I've seen people succeed in that 90% of the time. They do turn it around sometimes.
I've seen a lot of people quit after the campaign
Yep.
because it hurts their morale so much. They just like them.
Yeah, I'm not going to do this. I'm out of here. Yeah. That's a very common response. My view, how a company handles these things, it gets out. people talk about it. So if somebody quits, if a company gets really hard on a person and there's a perception that they're not being very humane in the process, it gets out. And it's a reputation hit on the company. And it hits the morale of not just the person who's leaving, but that spreads. It's like it's not a thing you want to be happening. You know, it hurts the reputation of the company. So the more humane you are in the process here, the better off everybody is. Okay, and as managers, you know, we're having sleepless nights when we're going through a situation like that with a person that works for us. It's very difficult all around. Okay. Thanks, Seaver. All right, step 4. So this now is a behind-the-scenes part of it, right? This is what takes place, right? You need to make sure, right, that now management is looking at this and saying, have we done everything fairly here, right? Does this person have a contract that we have to, you know, handle certain things? If we have a severance policy or they have a severance in their contract, there are certain things we've made commitments on, we have to do these things, right? Very important. You have to look at, did this person, you know, recently, you know, raise an issue with a governmental agency? Did they go to the Department of Labor? Were they out on workman's comp? Those are things that, yeah, we can say all we want, that wasn't about that, this was about performance. It calls into question what was really going on here. Did you fire this person for another reason and you manufactured this situation? So companies need to look at that and make sure none of that was going on around the time, probably in the last year, right? There have been recent things in the news where, you know, sexual harassment, where people have been let go, but they filed a sexual harassment charge 2 years before. And now they're claiming, well, they let me go because of my sexual harassment charge that I filed 2 years ago. So, you know, those are things that can happen. So it's a risk. So you have to be aware of it. It doesn't mean that it doesn't ultimately happen. It's just you have to weigh the risks and deal with those. You know, is this an employee that's been employed for 6 months? Or have they been here for 25 years? There's a difference, right? There's a difference. So you have to make sure someone that's been here 25 years is likely to get a different deal going out the door in terms of severance and, you know, how long they're paid and those kinds of things going out the door than someone that's only been there 6 months, right? So there is a difference. Any questions on that? All right, termination, last step, okay? You've gone through all of this, you have the termination discussion. We don't have that discussion alone, right? HR is in the room at a minimum. Sometimes there's 3 people, manager's manager, HR. I tend to not like the gang approach. I've had these conversations where it's been 3 people in a room. It's tough. You know, I'd like to keep it to 2 if at all possible. But you're never alone for this one. Nor should you be alone for that final warning. Okay? So no one's fired anybody yet, right? Okay. That's good. That's a good thing. That's a good thing. Okay, any questions on the 5-step process? Really quick tips for giving feedback. Direct, but humane. Be very direct, but have empathy in your communication, right? Not having the conversation or avoiding that is just not good for the employee. It's not the right way to treat your employee who's struggling. Be open and honest and direct in all your conversations when it has to do with dealing with performance issues. Put yourself in that person's shoes. If it were you, wouldn't you want the person to be honest with you? And if they didn't think you were right for the job, why wouldn't they just tell me? Right? So sometimes if we put ourselves in the employee's shoes, it makes us do the right thing for them. Right? Some things to make sure we say as we get into these tough discussions, right? Again, about being honest, right? Keep telling them that we've had these discussions and you're still falling short. Your performance just is not acceptable and you need to improve. Immediate and sustained improvement is necessary for you to keep your job. Failure to improve your performance in the next 30 days may result in the loss of your job. If you haven't said at a minimum these 4 statements to a person in the last 30 to 60 days, you haven't done the right thing. Okay? Never alone. Be prepared. Script for everything. And I don't mean read it. I don't mean have the script out. You can have your notes there, right? But practice. Practice with your dog or your cat the night before. Practice with a special someone or a brother or sister or whatever. Don't go in not having really practiced the conversations. Okay? It's really important. And goes with never wing it, right? Script it out. Okay. All right, so I'm going to give you guys a choice here because we're out of time if we're going to have time for the breakouts. So I've got like 15 minutes yet to go. So if we do that, we're only going to have 30 minutes for breakouts. The next things I have are communicating a raise, communicating a promotion, communicating that you're not getting a raise or not getting a promotion. What factors go into determining raises and promotions. Show of hands if you want me to go through those things, or we can put them into next week's session. If you want me to stop now, we do breakouts, hands raised. Okay, 1. All right, I'm going to keep going. I'm going to keep going. They shut the air off too? It's hot in here. Okay. So, all right, question. Oh. Yeah. Acting what? Humane, yeah.
What would be a good approach for handling layoffs?
Okay. That's very different because it's not performance related.
It could partly be sometimes too, but
Well, sometimes we determine who gets laid off by ranking people, and you don't let go your stars necessarily, right? So it's the same thing, but what makes it a little bit easier is that it becomes a conversation about company financial performance, right? But it's okay and, maybe advisable to say, look, this is how you wound up on the list. It's not that you're a bad person, but when we ranked you against these 5 criteria, you came out at the bottom of the rankings. And that's how you wound up in this room today, having this conversation with us. So I always script those conversations as well, so I never go in cold. I always give the manager the script. So this is what the manager says, and then this is what I'm going to say. So the manager knows what I'm saying, I know what the manager's saying, and in those conversations, we don't go deep into how the decisions were made. It's the decision was made, it's financial in nature, or we've restructured and your job has been eliminated, but we don't, and the employee will have, could have many questions, but I do not go deep, because there's nothing you're going to say that's going to change the decision. And nothing you're going to say that's going to make this employee feel better about what's just happened to them. They didn't see it coming. They didn't, So doing a deep dive doesn't solve anything. And it could make things much more difficult, because certain questions, you give an answer, it leads to other questions. And I'll tell you, early in my career, I made a couple mistakes like that, and we could get out of the room for an hour and a half. You don't want to do that, because in the end, nothing changes. The company made a decision, and you're impacted in this way. And let's talk about how we're going to handle the exit. So the focus then becomes, when do you leave? How much time do you have to go through, get your personal belongings, go through do you have access to your laptop? Because sometimes you don't, right? If you have personal things, this is what we'll have. IT will get those for you from your laptop, and we'll put them on a thumb drive. Those are the details you spend talking about in that conversation. How are we handling the exit? Not why are we having this conversation in detail. Does that help? My first job as a manager, we did a layoff. Actually, it was my third role in a management. I worked for IBM, and it was at a time when we had guaranteed employment in the beginning, and we made a decision. New CEO came on board, and they decided they would not guarantee your job anymore. IBM, in a period of less than 2 years, cut 200,000 jobs. So I laid off almost 300 people in a period of just a few months. It was brutal. Talk about sleepless nights. I learned a lot, but it was not a pleasant time. I had the overall conversations, and then managers did individual conversations. I was in an HR role at the time. The way they did it was you just called 60 people in a room, and we said, 60 days from now, your jobs will come to an end. And if you can find something within IBM, another job, great. But don't ask your manager to help you, because they're going to. So it was brutal. It was brutal. Yeah, it was tough. Yeah. That's one of the tough parts about business. All right. Factors determining a raise. What do you think goes into, determining what raises are for people? Past performance, yeah. What else? Budgets, financial situation of the company, right? Previous salary, good one. What is it? Industry, right? What the market will bear, right? What are other companies? What's the competition paying for a similar job? Good, you guys got them, just about all of them. Company has a guideline, right? What they pay for specific jobs, there's salary grids and guidelines. Financial health of the company, the overall economy, right? Right? Market rates, individual performance, current salary in relation to the salary guidelines, right? And then competition. So when you communicate a raise, there's a lot of managers who just say, hey, congratulations, I'm giving you a $5,000 raise. You've done a great job. Thank you very much. Talk about a few other things, pats on the back, done, right? didn't give them anything in writing. You didn't give them any more detail other than say you got a $5,000 raise. You need to do more than that, okay? The right way to communicate a raise is first, prepare. You're having a conversation that's meaningful with an employee. You need to be prepared, okay? Maybe this person's going to be like, $5,000? You call that a raise? All I do for you, and you're only giving me $5,000? You have to be ready for that response. You might think this is going to be a wonderful bit of news they're receiving. They may be receiving a completely different because their perceptions are not the same as yours. Okay? So you have to be ready. Be positive. Yep, you want to be positive. It's good news, right? I always write it down. You need to write down the increase. I give current salary. I give it in an annual amount, and next to that, I give if you're paid every 2 weeks, I give it that amount, right? So if you're paid 24 pay periods, I take the salary divided by 24, and I put that figure right next to it. So they can see that's a per paycheck, right? That's current salary. Amount of the increase, I do the same thing. The annual increase, what's it going to be in each paycheck, right? What's the new salary on an annual basis per paycheck, okay? It takes you less than 5 minutes to type this out on a piece of paper or write it on a piece of paper. If you want to write it out, I've written it out lots of times. And my writing's horrible, but I gave it to them in writing, right? Some companies, we do that here, is we have a letter, a standard letter that says, congratulations, you've received an increase, these are the details. And it's in a letter and it's signed, okay? So it's done for the manager. You always give them the effective date because sometimes, you know, the payday's tomorrow, they get the check and they're like, they come running into you, it's like, my raise is not in here. Like, yeah, it's not effective till the next paycheck, you know? So letting them know when it's effective is really important because that moment of, they forgot my raise, they didn't give it to me. Let's avoid that. Tell them when it's going to be in their check, okay? Even if they're not disappointed, but try to avoid saying, you know, you deserve twice this. Well, if I deserve twice, why did you give me twice the amount, right? Don't say that, okay? We all want to make more. We all want to give our employees more. But don't put that kind of a spin on a communication like this, okay? Any questions on that? All right. Communicating a promotion. It's very similar, right? I mean, it's good news. There's dollars. So for the dollar portion of that, it's the same, right? You want to write the amounts. You want to tell them the effective date. Factors in a promotion, right? So you've got performance, right? Same as for dollars. A person has acquired new skills, right? Maybe they've gotten a master's degree. Maybe they've been working hard to learn new skills. You've teamed them up with a more experienced employee, and they've really come through and they've shined, and they've earned a promotion for now having those new skills. Maybe a role's become available because someone resigned or someone got promoted, and through succession planning, the company had identified that your employee was the next person that was ready to backfill that person if they were to ever leave or that job became vacant, and the time has come. So they move into that new role, or they're in the same role but they're taking on new clients, more complex issues, promotion, right? And compensation, same factors as in the raise, right? So be prepared with the job description and the details for the new job, right? You want to tell somebody, congratulations, you're being promoted. Well, what does it mean, right? Give them the data so that they understand what does that mean. What's the new job look like, okay? Again, you give it in writing so they have all the amounts. If they're moving to a new department, they're not going to be working for you anymore, I always want the receiving manager in that conversation. It's congratulations, you've earned a promotion. You're now going to be working for Christine, and she's here to tell you about the new role, right? So it's a dual conversation, and that's always very positive. They're going to have questions. If they're moving to a different department, working for a different manager, they're going to have questions that you can't answer, right? So always great to have that other person involved. Talk about some key accomplishments, why they earned a promotion, and just like with a raise, you got to be ready for the this is you call this a promotion, or this is all I'm getting for a promotion. And I want to identify one really important factor that, if you haven't figured it out yet, I'm gonna reveal a little secret that a lot of people don't really talk about in business. So when we talk about dollars, we talk about a raise, just like a raise for doing a good job, and we talk about a raise associated with a promotion. They're typically very different. If you get a merit raises, if you look at statistics, what is the typical merit raise? And you hear this stuff on the news all the time, right? The forecast, companies are saying that the average employee is going to receive a 3% raise this year. That's typical. 2 to 3% is the average merit increase across the board for an organization. And that's an average. That means some people are getting less, some people are getting a little bit more, but the average is 2 to 3%. And some people aren't getting anything. Right? So when you look at a promotion, promotions can be just 3%, but promotions can also be more. Right? So typically, for us as employees to really accelerate our compensation, the way you do that is by earning promotions through additional responsibilities, new roles, and those kinds of things. That's where the bigger increases, changes, the lifestyle changing increases occur. Okay? So when employees receive merit increases and they feel like, oh, that was kind of a letdown, it's only 3%. Well, that's not where you earn the big changes in your compensation. To get that, you need to change your role, you need to increase your value to the company, so they're putting additional responsibilities on you. And that's typically where you earn the bigger changes in compensation. Okay? A lot of companies don't explain that very well. And employees become kind of disenchanted when they hear they've gotten a 2 or 3% merit increase this year. Okay? That's how it works in real life. Yeah.
What if an employee is disappointed in the promotion raise? And what would you say? I mean, one negative would you say like an in-house raise, like standard process?
Yeah. So.
But even if they're still unhappy with what would you say? Are we going to go back to HR? Are we going to go back to management?
You could. Okay? The first approach is being prepared for that objection, right? Some companies allow you to share what are the salary grids like. Like I've had conversations where you take an employee, and this goes to a point you made earlier, is, if a person's at one level and they're high in the salary grids for that level, right? So there's a range, and they're in like the 75th percentile. They're way up there, versus somebody that was lower in the top pay. So they're high at this. So now when they get promoted and they go to the next level, they may already be well into the maximum salary range for the next level. So what happens from a company perspective is they may receive less of a raise than someone who, not having a higher salary in that lower position, now they've moved into the next level. They may not even be in the grid. You have to give them a bigger increase just to get them into the range for that new role. So they might see a bigger increase. But what you can't tell is employee A was making less money to begin with. Employee B was making more money to begin with, so your increase may not be as high for that promotion. So depending on what you're allowed to share with the employees, that may be part of the conversation. Here's the range we pay for your current role. You're high. Here's the next role that you're in, and in the salary grids, this is what we can pay you. So you were making a fairly good salary, comparatively speaking, with others in the organization and according to our grids. So you're not going to see as big of an increase for this promotion. Sometimes that's the conversation. So they have another perspective, right? Knowing more information than this is what I got, sometimes that'll help with the conversation. Sometimes you do go back and ask for permission to give a little bit more based upon a response. It doesn't always happen, right, that you get the additional dollars, but it's an option. It shouldn't be your first option. First option is to try to address the questions that that person has or objections through some factual information, right? The average increase for this organization for promotions is this. You got that, right? So data. Get permission in your preparation. What data can I share to support this raise? Be ready with that. Those are your first pieces of ammunition to address the questions. And if that fails, then you may need to go see if you can get more. If you think it's deserved. It may not be. You can't always make the employee happy in those situations, unfortunately. We do our best to get them to understand why, but you can't, you're never going to be, 100% successful. Or not always, I should say.
Well, there's also cases where this happened personally, the company has a freeze or something, so your promotion comes
That's right.
later.
Again, that's all part of the data. If the company has a freeze and, we can't do any more, or, yeah. Those, again, that's the data that'll help you answer the objections, okay? That's all part of preparing for that conversation. Don't assume it's going to be great news to that employee. Got to do a little bit of preparation when you communicate a raise, okay? Good question. Any others? All right. Okay. Employee comes to you, says, I deserve a raise or I deserve a promotion. Okay? If they come to you like out of the blue, kind of hard to be prepared for that, right? Sometimes, in order for that conversation to go well, you might need to say, hey, you know what? I'm not prepared for that conversation. And in order for me to do you justice, you need to give me a little bit of time to get prepared, and we're going to get back together tomorrow, or set a time and come back after you're prepared to have that conversation and do your homework, right? It's part of being honest. If you're going to fumble through that conversation because you're not prepared to say you're not ready for a promotion, but you're not comfortable being direct and honest because you haven't done a few minutes of preparation, hold off if you can. Okay, some people don't want to give you the time, but most people will say, okay. If you tell them tomorrow at 10 we're going to sit down and we're going to talk about it, most employees will say, okay, cool. right? If they're not ready, identify. Have the, there's a little bit of coaching here, right? All right, you want to get there? You're not ready yet. What do you think you need to do to get there? Okay, here's what I think you need to do to get there. Put a plan in place, okay? Listen to their side of it. Answer honestly your viewpoint. If you don't agree that they're ready. I've seen this happen many times. Employee says, but when I look at my job description, I've done all of the things in that job description. I've done them. So if I've done them, shouldn't I be promoted? Doing them and being proficient are two different things, right? Repeated, showing proficiency, becoming an expert. Maybe that position isn't available. We already have 3 senior analysts and a budget for the group doesn't have room for any more. Those are things that you need to be prepared for in that conversation, right? So you have that conversation with the person, talk about specifics and the plan to get there.
Do you feel like employees always need to do the initiatives that you express interest in, or can you be looking after them and think that they're ready and want to ruin that?
Look, as managers, our role, we kind of went through that before, right? So our role as managers is to provide those opportunities, provide for opportunities to get the experience, to build skills, to further the individual, but further your organization as well, right? Because everybody wins. So yeah, it is our responsibility to do that. But sometimes things aren't happening as quickly as an employee thinks they should be. And that's where that honest conversation is necessary. And sometimes they do come right out and say, I'm overdue. And if you disagree, you've got to have the conversation on here's why I disagree. I'm listening, I'm willing to listen, but we're going to collaborate here. We're going to have a discussion. So I want you to understand my view, and I'm going to try to understand yours, right? In the end, it does come down, it is your decision, right? Well, your decision within the guidelines that you're allowed to decide, but so yeah. Look, employees ask for raises and promotions every day. It happens, right? It's what we do, it's how we respond to those conversations that makes all the difference. One thing you got to be careful of is, not to overcommit, right? You got to be careful. A lot of managers make mistakes of guaranteeing, hey, if you do these 6 things, you'll be promoted on this date. Be careful, because sometimes things happen out of our control. Freeze. They could freeze salaries, right? Your manager could change, and your new manager comes in and says, I didn't make that commitment. You made that commitment. Deal with it. We're not doing that. Budgets change, situations change, so you have to be really careful. You always got to have a caveat, right? You do these things by this date. We are going to do our best to make this happen for you, okay? I can't guarantee. Things change, budgets change, situations change, but if we're able to do it, we'll do it, okay? And you know what? Send them an email saying, hey, we had this conversation today. This is the commitment I made to you. Right? Be careful about committing to things. And believe me, they'll hear what they want to hear sometimes, right? They're like, I didn't say that. I never said that. Oh, yes, you did. You promised me that I'd get a raise if I did these 6 things. So you got to be a little bit careful on that. Okay? Good question. Anybody else? All right. Always use the next level of management and HR to help you in some of those tougher conversations. Okay. All right. Any questions? We're not going to have time for breakouts. Some of you might be disappointed in that. Some maybe not. But I really went way over. I misjudged. I knew I had a lot of slides, but I did not go this long. Questions, comments? Yeah.
I have a question. So I have someone on my team who's like a very high performer, pretty self-sufficient, dependent, and I always struggle with ways to help this person actually be of value. And when it comes to reviews, like it's very difficult to find opportunities for improvement. I know we're coming up on a review probably in a couple of months, and I wonder like what the line is between being like overly picky while trying to come up with something. Like I don't know, maybe one idea would be asking her to be more like proactive about industry learning. But at that point, it almost seems like
You're grasping at
right.
things,
I
yeah.
don't want to like be overly critical. So how have you dealt
So-
with that, like really high performers to try to help them?
Yeah.
do that?
So she's your top?
Yeah,
She's just
yeah,
really, really good.
Yeah, like mature. It's hard to think of ways to be of use to the manager.
Okay. So have you been having conversations with upper management about this person needs a place to go? We need to, you want to retain her. And sometimes to retain somebody, you have to lose her. So,
Promoted her, so it's not like
okay,
she's been like chilling in the same position. That's
okay.
easy for
So you've just promoted her. Well, what about having a succession planning conversation with her and yeah, have you put together an employee development plan for her? I don't know if your company does those things. No?
we have goals for each year.
Okay. You know, another module I do is we're not doing this in this series, but it's another idea for a future class, is employee development plans. So you put together a plan to prepare that person for, you know, where you want to be in the next 12 months, where you want to be in 3 years, and where do you want to be in 5 years. And you put together a plan so they have, you know, sight on where things could be over a given period of time. And it may involve other places within the organization. So exposing this person to other areas of the company would be a nice reward, maybe. I'm just thinking of ideas, you know, going outside. See, because you're looking at your world only right now, and you're running out of your world. Her world's getting kind of small, right? Because she's capable of so much more, but your concern is you don't know that you've got enough to excite her. So you may have to go beyond that world she's currently in and look for opportunities. Where can she be involved in helping with other things? Bigger companies have, you know, work groups, round tables that focus on problems the company's having that are, you know, they throw people in a room and they hash things out. So there's a variety of things that might exist if you think beyond the world she works in, your department, that might help in that. So now it's about how do we get you to that next step? You've just been promoted. I only have so much to give you. Here are some things that we're going to do that's really different, that we don't do for everybody else. See, that goes a long way. Like, we don't do this for everybody, but we're talking to you about this. It's not something we typically do, but you're that good. She's going to feel pretty good, and she's going to be more engaged, and she's going to appreciate what you're doing to go beyond. So you might want to try something like that if you're out of runway, as they say. What else? Any other questions before we wrap? Oh, you know, I will give you the breakout sheets so you can, you know, there's like the first page is like a cheat sheet to give you some ideas on how to approach the scenarios, and then the scenarios, and you can just kind of go through them in your mind, and so you have them. So At least you didn't get to do it as a group, but at least you have them. If you guys ever have questions that you don't want to deal with your HR person or your manager, you want to go someplace safe, you can always email me. I'll give you input. It's just Eric with a K, no C, at thearf.org. All right, I think that wraps it. Thanks for coming, you guys. So next Tuesday, the principles of delegation is the topic.